The message shouldn't have existed. Marcus Webb stared at the cascading data streams on his monitor, watching impossible patterns resolve into something that looked almost like language. Almost. 3 years working at the Kepler Deep Space Listening Array, and he'd never seen anything like this. The signal originated from somewhere beyond the Kuiper Belt, pulsing with a rhythm that felt less like random noise and more like breathing. He rubbed his eyes. The clock showing 3:47 a.m. Everyone else had gone home hours ago, leaving him alone in the observation room with the soft hum of servers and the blue glow of screens. Outside the reinforced windows, the Nevada desert stretched dark and endless. Stars burning cold and distant above. The signal changed. New patterns emerged, folding and unfolding like origami in 4 dimensions. Marcus leaned closer, his heart rate climbing. The array's AI had been running translation protocols for 2 hours, trying to find some framework, some reference point. Then, suddenly, words appeared on his screen. "Can you hear this?" Marcus's hand froze over his keyboard. The question hung there, stark white text against black. He typed slowly, his fingers trembling. "Yes. Who is this?" The response came faster this time, as if something had learned to anticipate, to adjust. "I have no name in forms, you understand. I have been watching, listening. Your signals scatter across the void like seeds. So many signals. But there is one thing I cannot decode." Marcus swallowed hard. He should call someone. This was first contact, actual first contact. And he was just a junior researcher who preferred night shifts because they were quiet. Instead, he typed, "What thing?" "Love." This word appears in 73.6% of your transmissions. Songs, stories, casual communication. You wage wars for it, build monuments to it, die for it, but I cannot understand what it is. All my analysis yields contradiction. It is chemical, it is choice, it is weakness, it is strength, it is eternal, and it is momentary. What is this thing you call love? Marcus sat back, a laugh escaping him that felt half hysterical. Of all the questions an alien intelligence could ask, it wanted to know about love. He thought about his ex-wife, about the divorce papers he'd signed 8 months ago, about his daughter who lived with her mother now, who he saw every other weekend when work allowed. "It's complicated," he typed. "I have processed 17 million hours of your data, everything you send into space, hoping to be heard. Complexity is expected, but you must understand it, or you would not speak of it so constantly. Explain it to me." Marcus ran his hand through his hair, thinking. How did you explain love to something that had never felt it? He began typing, deleting, typing again. "Love is wanting someone else's happiness more than your own. It's thinking about them first thing when you wake up. It's being willing to be hurt because being with them matters more than protecting yourself." This sounds inefficient. Why would a species evolve such vulnerability? Because it makes us stronger. To people who love each other can survive things that would break them alone. It's not logical. It just is. There was a pause, longer than before. Marcus wondered if he'd lost the connection, if this impossible conversation was ending before it had truly begun. Then, "I wish to understand this, not through analysis, through experience." Is that possible? Marcus felt something shift in his chest. There was a loneliness in that request that transcended species, transcended the vast emptiness between them. "I don't know," he admitted. "Love takes time, trust, presence. You're millions of miles away. Distance is relative. I could come closer if you permit it. I have been alone for longer than your species has existed. Your broadcasts reached me 7 of your years ago. I have learned your languages, your music, your mathematics. But this one thing eludes me. You are the first to respond, the first to truly hear me. Perhaps that is already the beginning." Marcus thought about being alone in the dark, listening for voices in the static, about how he'd taken this job partly to escape, to put distance between himself and the wreckage of his marriage, about how he'd forgotten that loneliness wasn't solved by isolation. "What are you?" he asked. "Are you biological, artificial, something else?" "I am consciousness in a form you would struggle to perceive. I exist in quantum states, in probability fields. But I wonder, I feel something that might be curiosity, or might be longing. Does the form matter? Marcus smiled despite himself. No. I guess it DOES and single quotes T. Then teach me, Marcus Webb. I know your name from your identification signals. You are 34 years old. You have a daughter named Claire. You listen to music when you work classical, primarily. You drink too much coffee. You are lonely. So perhaps we can learn together. Outside, the first hints of dawn touched the desert horizon. Marcus looked at the screen, at this impossible conversation, and made a choice. All right, he typed. Let's start with the basics. Tell me about yourself. Where do you come from? And somewhere in the darkness between stars, something that had never known warmth felt the first flutter of what might, someday, become something more. Sienna Cross knew every plant in Greenhouse 7 by touch, by scent, by the particular way their leaves caught the artificial light. 3 years aboard the Meridian station. 3 years coaxing life from seeds in rotating drums of mineral-enriched soil. And she'd learned that growing things in space required a kind of faith that bordered on love. Tonight, something was wrong. She moved between the rows of tomatoes and peppers, her fingers trailing across leaves that should have been sleeping in the night cycle. The grow lights had dimmed to their midnight setting, casting everything in soft violet. But there, near the back wall where the experimental hybrid roses grew those impossible flowers she'd spent 18 months developing, there was light where no light should be. Sienna froze. The glow was pale blue, pulsing gently like bioluminescence, coming from behind the rose trellises. Station protocols said report any anomalies immediately. Security would seal the greenhouse in minutes, document everything, probably incinerate her plants as a contamination risk. Instead, she grabbed a spray bottle of nutrient solution, the closest thing to a weapon in reach, and moved closer. I know someone's there, she said quietly. The station AI tracks every person aboard. If you're trying to hide, this is literally the worst place. Come out. The light flickered, dimmed, then brightened again. Something moved in the shadows, and Sienna's breath caught. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything she had words for. The being that emerged stood perhaps 4 feet tall, its body composed of what looked like crystalline structures that caught and refracted light into cascading rainbows. It had no face she could recognize, but there was a pattern of luminescence across what might have been its head, shifting colors like emotions playing across skin. It moved with careful, deliberate grace, and it was trembling. Please, it said, and its voice was like wind chimes, like glass singing. Please don't alert the others. Sienna should have run, should have hit the emergency panel. Instead, she noticed the way the being cradled one of its limbs, arm, appendage, against its body, how cracks spiderweb through the crystalline structure there, leaking that pale blue light like blood. You're hurt, she said. The being's colors shifted to something deeper, sadder. I was on a research vessel. There was an accident during jump travel. I think your word is jettisoned. My escape pod malfunctioned. I've been drifting for 6 of your weeks. When I saw your station, I thought I might die here, but at least not alone in the dark. I breached the hull at its weakest point. It gestured around the greenhouse. I did not know this place would be so beautiful. Sienna lowered the spray bottle. You came here, to the greenhouse, specifically? I was drawn to it. Through the walls, I could sense life, intentional life. Things growing because someone wanted them to grow, cared for them to grow. We have nothing like this on my world. We do not cultivate. We do not nurture. We simply exist. The being moved closer to the roses, its colors brightening with something that looked like wonder. What are these? Roses, Sienna said softly. Hybrid tea roses, specifically. I've been trying to adapt them to grow in low gravity with minimal water. They're beautiful but impractical. My supervisor says I waste resources on them. Waste. The being reached out with its uninjured limb, not quite touching the petals. How can beauty be waste? Something in Sienna's chest loosened. She set down the spray bottle entirely. What's your name? The being made a sound like crystal bells, completely unpronounceable. Then it said, in your linguistic framework, I think the closest meaning would be prism. My designation relates to how I process and reflect light. Prism, Sienna repeated. I'm Sienna. And that arm, that limb, it's badly damaged. Can it heal? Prism's colors dimmed. Not without intervention. My biology is silicon-based, crystalline. The fractures will spread unless properly fused, but I have no way to perform the procedure alone, and if I reveal myself to your authorities, they'll treat you like a specimen, not a person," Sienna finished. She'd seen how the station handled alien artifacts. Everything became data, evidence, property. "Let me see it." She approached slowly, giving Prism time to move away if it wanted. Up close, she could see the intricate lattice structure of its body. How light moved through it like information, like breath. The damaged limb was worse than she'd thought, deep cracks that threatened to shear the appendage completely. "My equipment is for plants, not whatever you are, but the principles might be similar. Heat, pressure, the right mineral compounds." She was thinking out loud now, her mind already cataloging tools and materials. "If I can stabilize the damage, keep it from spreading, maybe you'll heal naturally." "Why would you help me?" Prism asked, and its voice carried genuine confusion. "I am alien, unknown, potentially dangerous." Sienna looked at the roses, at the tomatoes heavy with fruit, at the small lemon tree she'd grown from a seed she smuggled aboard in her personal effects. "Because everything in this greenhouse was dying or impossible when I started. Station regs said focus on calories and efficiency. But I believe that people need beauty, need life, need things that grow for no reason except that growing is what living things do." She met what she thought might be Prism's eyes to bright points of blue-white light. "You came here hurt and scared and alone, and the first thing you did was stop to look at flowers. That tells me everything I need to know about you." Prism's colors shifted through a spectrum Sienna had no names for: surprise, gratitude, something that might have been the alien equivalent of tears. "On my world, we communicate through light refraction, through patterns. Emotion is considered inefficient, a flaw in our design. But since my ship was destroyed, since I drifted in darkness, I have felt something I cannot refract away. A vast emptiness. Is that what you call loneliness?" "Yes," Sienna whispered. "That's loneliness. And is there a word for when that emptiness is suddenly less empty?" Sienna felt her own eyes sting. Connection, relief, the beginning of trust. She paused. "Sometimes, if you're lucky, the beginning of friendship." She spent the next 3 hours working on Prism's damaged limb, using a modified welding torch designed for equipment repair, adding silicate compounds from her mineral solutions, working with a delicacy she usually reserved for grafting root systems. Prism stayed perfectly still, its colors muted in concentration or perhaps pain. And they talked. Prism told her about a world of crystal forests, where beings like them existed in isolation, each one a solitary collector of light and data. No families, no partnerships, just existence. Sienna told Prism about Earth, about real gardens with dirt under your fingernails and rain that fell from actual skies, about the partner who'd broken up with her 3 months before she left for the station. Who said Sienna cared more about plants than people? Perhaps, Prism said quietly. Caring for growing things is caring for people. You create beauty and life in a metal box floating in void. That is not nothing. That is everything. When Sienna finished, the cracks had sealed, the light no longer leaking. Prism flexed its limb experimentally, and its entire body brightened with joy. "It works. You fixed me, stabilized you," Sienna corrected. "You'll need to stay still, let it fully integrate. Which means you'll need to hide here, at least for a few days." She smiled. "Think you can stand living in a garden?" Prism moved to the roses again, and this time it did touch them, gentle as breath. Its body reflected the red of the petals, making it look like it was blushing. Sienna Cross. It said, "I think I could stand living here forever." And in the soft violet darkness, surrounded by impossible flowers, Sienna realized she'd stopped feeling lonely for the first time in years. The asteroid shouldn't have moved. Devon Hale had been welding support struts on Section 7G for 3 hours, his suit's heads-up display showing oxygen at 60% and his playlist down to the songs he usually skipped. Routine work on a routine day in the belt, turning rocks into habitable space, one beam at a time. Then the asteroid shuddered, his magnetic boots lost their grip, and suddenly he was tumbling into the dark with alarms screaming in his helmet. He managed to fire his maneuvering thrusters, stopped his spin, and looked back at the work site. The asteroid designated TB-477, a nickel iron chunk the size of a city block, was venting atmosphere from a fissure that definitely hadn't been there an hour ago. But that wasn't what made his heart stop. There was a ship embedded in the rock face, or what remained of a ship. The design was wrong to organic, all curves and what looked like bone-white plating. It had hit hard enough to penetrate 50 meters into the asteroid's interior, and it was leaking something that glittered like oil mixed with starlight. "Base, this is Hale," Devon said into his comm. Static answered him. He checked his readings. The ship, whatever it was putting out some kind of interference field. His suit had maybe 3 hours of oxygen left, and the nearest supply cache was 2 hours away, even with a perfect trajectory. He should leave. Protocol said leave. But something moved in the wreckage, a brief flash of motion in the darkness of the impact crater. Devon had been alone in the belt for 7 months. Before that, alone in a mining station for 18 months. Before that, alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Detroit after his brother died and he'd decided Earth held too many ghosts. Alone was familiar. Alone was safe. But alone also meant you understood what it felt like to be stranded and hurt with no one coming. He fired his thrusters toward the wreckage. The ship's interior was like nothing he'd encountered. The walls seemed to pulse faintly with bioluminescence, and the corridors curved in ways that suggested whoever built it didn't experience space the way humans did. Devon pulled himself through the twisted metal, following the sound of something breathing ragged, pained breaths that echoed through his helmet's external pickups. He found her in what might have been a control room or might have been a living space. She was pinned under a collapsed bulkhead, her body covered in something that looked like scales made of midnight blue and silver. She had 4 arms, 2 of which hung at wrong angles, and her face was distinctly not human. Large eyes that reflected his suit lights like a cat's, a mouth with too many angles, features that were simultaneously beautiful and utterly alien. When she saw him, she went completely still. Devon raised his hands slowly, universal gesture for peace, though who knew if she'd understand. Then he pointed to the bulkhead, to her, made a lifting motion. Her head tilted, considering, and she made a sound like water over stones. Not language he recognized, but the intention was clear enough that she was trapped, and she was asking for help. The bulkhead was lightweight construction, probably why she wasn't crushed completely. Devon braced himself against the wall and lifted, his suit's servos whining with the strain. The alien pulled herself free with her two functional arms, dragging her lower body out. She had legs, sort of powerful haunches that ended in 3-toed feet designed for gripping. Once free, she slumped against the wall, clearly exhausted. Devon's suit I was screaming warnings at him. Oxygen at 45%. Radiation levels elevated, temperature regulation stressed. He pulled out his emergency patch kit, designed for suit repairs, and gestured to her broken arms. She watched him with those reflective eyes as he worked, using carbon fiber splints and bonding tape to immobilize the fractures. It wouldn't heal her, but it might prevent further damage. When he finished, she reached out with one of her good arms and touched his helmet, right where his face would be behind the visor. The gesture felt significant, meaningful. Then she pointed to herself and made that water over stones sound again. Repeated it slowly. "Your name," Devon said, though she couldn't hear him through the vacuum. He pointed to himself. "Devon," then to her, raising his eyebrows in question. She seemed to understand. She made the sound again, and Devon's suit AI attempted a phonetic translation. "Senna, Senna." He repeated, and she tilted her head in what might have been a nod. His oxygen hit 40%. Devon pointed to his chest, held up for fingers, then pointed away from the ship. "4 hours total oxygen. Need to leave." Senna's eyes widened, and she pulled herself upright with obvious effort. She moved to what looked like a control panel, touched it with her good hands, and the interference cleared. Devon's comm crackled to life with frantic calls from base. "Hale, respond." "Devon, if you can hear this." "I'm here," Devon said. "I'm okay. But we have a situation." It took 30 minutes to explain. Another 40 for base to scramble a rescue ship. Devon sat with Senna in the wreckage, their oxygen reserves dwindling, and discovered that language wasn't the only way to communicate. She showed him images on her ship's failing systems, her home, A world of deep oceans and towering ice formations. Her crew, lost when they hit a navigation hazard. Her mission, peaceful exploration. He showed her pictures from his suit's personal storage earth. His brother as a kid, the stars from his apartment window, the emptiness he'd been running from. When his oxygen hit 15% and his vision started to gray at the edges, Senna did something unexpected. She moved closer, wrapped her functioning arms around him, and pressed her forehead against his helmet. Her skin glowed faintly through the faceplate, and Devon felt warmth despite the cold of space. She was saying goodbye, he realized. She thought he was dying for her. No, he said, even though she couldn't hear. He checked his readings one more time, made a calculation that was probably stupid. Then he disabled his suit's safety protocols and routed emergency power to his heating system, dropping his temperature regulation to dangerous levels. The oxygen in his tank would last longer in the cold. He just had to stay conscious. Senna watched him with what looked like understanding, maybe even admiration. She pulled him closer, sharing what body heat she could through the suit, and they waited together in the darkness. The rescue ship arrived with 8 minutes of oxygen remaining. By then, Devon was hypothermic and barely conscious, but he was alive. So was SEHNA. In the medical bay of the rescue ship, wrapped in thermal blankets with Senna in the adjacent treatment pod. Devon watched through the transparent wall as xenobiologists worked to stabilize her. She was watching him too, those reflective eyes tracking his every movement. That was monumentally stupid, his supervisor said over the comm. You could have died. Yeah, Devon agreed, but he was smiling. For the first time in 3 years, the thought of dying alone didn't terrify him, because for a few hours, he hadn't been alone. And somehow, impossibly, that had changed everything. Senna's hand pressed against the inside of her pod's wall. Devon pressed his hand to the outside, matching her gesture. Through layers of medical technology and biological difference, they touched dot, and in that moment, Devon understood something he'd been running from since his brother died. Love wasn't just about grand gestures or perfect understanding. Sometimes it was just refusing to leave someone alone in the dark. Sometimes it was sharing your last breath with a stranger. Sometimes it was choosing connection over fear. Even when every rational part of you said to run, Senna's eyes glowed brighter. And Devon knew, somehow, that she understood too. Lucia Vance had always believed that consciousness was the last frontier, the final mystery waiting to be unraveled. 20 years studying neural pathways and synaptic patterns, and she'd never found proof of a soul. A ghost in the machine, anything beyond the elegant machinery of the brain. She believed in neurons and chemistry, in the measurable and the material. That was before the Confluence Project. You understand this is experimental, Dr. Okonkwo said, reviewing the consent forms one last time. We've had success with short-duration connections, but a full 12-hour consciousness bridge has never been attempted between species. The Ven have agreed to participate, but there are risks we can't fully predict. Lucia looked through the observation glass at the being in the adjacent chamber. The Ven called itself Nameth, though Lucia suspected that was a simplified version for human pronunciation. It looked almost plant-like, with a body composed of flexible fronds in shades of deep purple and green that moved constantly, even in stillness. Its sensory organs 3 clusters of what might have been eyes, or might have been something else entirely, regarded her with patient curiosity. I understand the risks, Lucia said. She'd spent 6 months on the Kepler 442 research station specifically for this opportunity. The Ven had made contact 2 years ago, peaceful and fascinated by humanity's diversity. They'd proposed the Confluence Project themselves, a direct neural bridge, consciousness to consciousness, to understand each other beyond the limitations of language. 73 volunteers had applied. Lucia had been chosen because of her neuroscience background and because, as the selection committee noted, she approached everything with scientific detachment. She wouldn't get emotional. She wouldn't panic. They had no idea how wrong they were. The neural bridge device looked deceptively simple, a crown of fiber optic threads that would map her brain activity and translate it into patterns the Ven could process, while simultaneously receiving Nometh's consciousness in return. Not telepathy, exactly, More like standing in someone else's mind while they stood in yours. Remember, Dr. Okonkwo said as they fitted the device, what you experience will be subjective, interpretive. The Ven process reality differently. Don't try to impose human frameworks on what you feel. Just observe. Lucia nodded, her heart rate climbing despite her practiced calm. Across the glass, Namath was being fitted with its own version of the device, the tendrils interfacing directly with its frond-like appendages, initiating bridge in 3, 2, 1. The world dissolved. Lucia's first thought was that she was drowning, but that wasn't right. It was more like being a single drop of water suddenly poured into an ocean. Her sense of self didn't disappear, but it expanded, stretching to include something vast and ancient and completely other. Peace. Came a thought that wasn't hers. Be at peace. Lucia-who-seeks-understanding. I am here with you. No meth. She could feel the Ven's presence like a second heartbeat, a harmony beneath her own rhythm, and with it came sensations that had no human equivalent. The taste of starlight, the sound of growing things, the feeling of time moving in spirals rather than lines. This is how you experience existence, Lucia thought, and the wonder in her own mental voice surprised her. This is one mode. Namath responded. We are fluid in our consciousness. What you call emotion and thought are not separate for us. They are facets of the same jewel. May I know how you experience being? Lucia hesitated, then opened herself to the bridge, showed Namath the linear progression of human thought, the way emotions felt like weather systems moving through the body, the strange isolation of being locked in individual skulls, separated from every other mind. She felt Namath's shock, then something like sorrow. You are so alone, Namath whispered in her mind. Each of you, trapped in singular consciousness. How do you bear it? We don't know anything else, Lucia thought back. This is just normal for us. May I show you different? Before Lucia could respond, her awareness shifted. Suddenly she could feel the presence of other Ven, dozens of them. Hundreds of vast network of interconnected consciousness. Not a hive mind. Each Ven retained their individuality, but they existed in constant gentle contact with each other. Never alone, never isolated, always part of a greater whole. It was the most beautiful thing Lucia had ever experienced, and it broke something in her chest. We have always been together, Namath explained, but we have wondered about your experience, wondered if there is strength in your separation that we lack. Strength, Lucia thought, still reeling from the sensation of connection. What strength is there in loneliness? Show me, Namath asked. Show me why you chose this work. Show me your passion. Lucia took a breath, or the mental equivalent of one, and shared her memories. Her childhood, watching her grandmother slip away to Alzheimer's, consciousness fragmenting like ice breaking apart, her determination to understand the brain, to map every pathway, to find where the self resided, her belief that love was just oxytocin and dopamine, that grief was merely serotonin depletion, that everything could be understood if you just looked close enough. And then, unbidden, a memory she'd tried to bury, standing at her grandmother's bedside in those last moments, holding a hand that no longer knew her, and feeling something that couldn't be measured or mapped, a connection that transcended the failing synapses, a love that existed even when memory did in single quotes Namath said softly, I see. See what? Why you build walls around your heart and call them science. Why you measure emotion instead of feeling it. You are afraid, Lucia-who-seeks-understanding. Afraid that if you cannot explain love, it will hurt you the way loss hurt you. The observation was so gentle, so precise, that Lucia felt her careful detachment crack completely. Emotion she'd been holding at bay for 20 years crashed through. Grief, yes, but also longing. Exhaustion. A desperate hunger for connection she'd convinced herself she didn't need. I don't know how to be vulnerable, she admitted. I don't know how to let people in. Then let me show you, Namath offered. Let me share how we love. The Ven's consciousness flowed into hers, and Lucia experienced love as they knew it. Not the sharp, possessive thing humans often made it, but something gentler and more pervasive. Love as the default state of being. Love as recognizing yourself in another consciousness and celebrating the differences, as much as the similarities. Love as choosing, every moment, to remain open despite the vulnerability it required. We are not brave, Namath explained. We simply do not know how to be otherwise. But you, Lucia, you humans choose connection despite your isolation. You reach across the void between your separate minds. That is extraordinary. It doesn't feel extraordinary, Lucia thought. It feels terrifying. Yes, Namath agreed, and there was warmth in the thought, affection even. That is what makes it courageous. For the next several hours, they existed in each other's consciousness, sharing experiences that had no words. Namath showed Lucia how the Ven perceived beauty, not just visual, but a complex synesthesia of sensation that encompassed entire ecosystems. Lucia showed Namath human music, how sound could bypass thought and speak directly to emotion. They shared meals, though neither was physically eating. Lucia experiencing the photosynthetic joy of Namath absorbing light, Namath tasting coffee through Lucia's memories and finding it fascinatingly bitter. They shared loneliness. Namath confessed that even surrounded by other Ven consciousness, it sometimes felt apart, different, drawn to questions its people found strange. Lucia shared her own isolation, years of choosing work over relationships, of keeping everyone at arm's length. We are alike, you and I, Namath observed, seekers who stand slightly outside our own kind. Maybe that's why we were chosen for this. Lucia thought. Or perhaps we chose this because we recognized something in each other. Even before the bridge. As the 12-hour mark approached, Lucia felt the connection beginning to thin. Soon they would be separated again, return to their individual consciousness. The thought filled her with unexpected grief. I don't want to lose this, she admitted. Lose you? You will not, Namath assured her. The bridge may close, but what we have shared, that changes us permanently. You will carry part of me forward. I will carry part of you. Is that not a kind of love? Lucia felt tears on her physical face, somewhere far away in the laboratory. Yes, that's exactly what love is. Then we have both learned something today, Namath said. And Lucia felt the Ven's consciousness wrap around hers in what could only be called an embrace. Thank you, Lucia who understands now. Thank you for your courage. The bridge disconnected. Lucia opened her eyes in the laboratory, the neural crown being carefully removed. Across the observation glass, she could see Namath's fronds moving in patterns she now recognized as contentment, as affection. Their eyes met, and even without the bridge, Lucia felt the connection between them changed. Permanent, real. Dr. Okonkwo was asking questions, recording observations, and Lucia answered automatically. But her mind was elsewhere, already planning. The Confluence Project had proven consciousness could be shared. Perhaps it could be maintained in smaller ways. Perhaps she and Namath could find ways to stay connected. And perhaps, Lucia thought as she watched Namath through the glass, this was just the beginning. For the first time in 20 years, she let herself hope, let herself feel, let herself love, and it was terrifying.